Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Mark Skidmore, and I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. And we're really glad you've joined us. I hear a little background noise. And so what I would suggest for the presenters, if you would just put it on mute until it's your turn to speak, that might reduce the noise level. There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so back to presenting the webinar. Thank you all for joining, especially for many of us. We are in shelter in place, and here in Michigan that's true. So Crystal and I are doing the webinar from each of our respective homes, and so hopefully we'll have good connectedness and everything will go off without any troubles. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to note here our upcoming webinars. The next one is on April 9th. The title is Childhood Trauma, Addiction, Incarceration Pipeline, a National Public Health Crisis Compounded in Rural Areas. We also have the next webinar on April 15th, Rural Quality of Life Indicators and Toolkit, a toolkit to improve rural communities. So I hope you'll keep those in mind. For today's webinar, we have as a title, The Impact of Volunteers on Sustainable Rural Community Development. And so we all know how, as working within Extension, we know how important volunteers are to the life of a community and in rural development in general. So today's presenters are SoJung Lee, who is an associate professor at the Department of Apparel, Events, and Hospitality Management at Iowa State University. MiRan Kim, who is an associate professor in the School of Hospitality Business at Michigan State University. Jichul Jang is an associate professor in the Department of Hospitality Management at Kansas State University. And Linda Niehm, who is a professor in the Department of Apparel, Events, and Hospitality Management at Iowa State University. And so with that, I'll remind the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, you can type it in the chat. And I think the presenters have agreed that they would address those questions at the end of their discussion. So with that, I believe SoJung is going to start us off, and I'll pass it on to her. And thanks again, everyone.
Great. Good morning, everyone. We would like to welcome you today to our NCLCRD webinar presentation titled The Impact of Volunteers on Sustainable Rural Community Development. I'm SoJung Lee from Iowa State University. So I will introduce first our study, and then our co-investigators will further share our findings and implications. So as you are very aware, rural communities have experienced extensive changes over time, especially in the last several decades. So these changes canvas all areas of community, economic, and social life, as evidenced by developments such as large-scale and high-tech farming and manufacturing decline and population aging and migration. However, rural communities are close-knit. They are very proud of their heritage and traditions, and many are seeking ways to bolster local economies and highlight what they have to offer. In particular, rural festival can be an important contributor to a community, and it can be a means of sustainable community development. So, for example, Traverse City in Michigan has only 15,000 residents. However, Traverse City Film Festival attracts over 100,000 visitors and generates over $5 million each year. So effective festival operation and management are essential to a successful event. And in fact, many rural festivals heavily rely on volunteers to remain valuable. However, there is a limited research that has done regarding the role of volunteers in rural community. So we wanted to know the role of volunteers and their characteristics, especially in North Central region. Volunteers in general very devote their time and effort without expecting anything directly in return. So they are typically strong advocates of the events they are supporting through their time and effort. Therefore, dedicated volunteers are critical for successful events as they are directly linked to their network of friends, relatives, colleagues, and other potential festival attendees. There are some studies about volunteers' characteristics that we can apply to our study. The first, several studies have looked at the volunteers' motivation and found that several important reasons why people volunteer, such as their values, for their understanding, and for social reasons, for career purpose, or to be protected, or for enhancement purpose. Second, a sense of ownership can be an important factor. This concept describes individuals' feelings of ownership in an organization. And organizational behavior research actually shows that psychological ownership is an important factor for a successful organization. And we actually did a pilot study before this study and found that motivation and psychological ownership had a significant impact on future volunteer intentions. Next, the community leadership is a critical factor. The volunteerism can play a key role in helping them to attract, retain, and develop skilled talent, and also growing future leaders for the community. Therefore, it will be an important factor to understand volunteers and leadership for successful community development. Also, community involvement can be another important part to understand how volunteers work toward their communities to proactively seek out community values, concerns, and aspirations. So, putting together all important pieces of volunteers, their motivation, ownership, and leadership and involvement will play key roles in supporting community development. The community capital framework, as you see the figure as here, as it was developed by Flora in 2008, can provide an important framework to understand valued assets in a community. So this study are framed by this community capital perspective. Various forms of community capitals can be enhanced by festivals, such as cultural, financial, and social capitals. And especially, volunteers are significant workforce assets in the rural community. So we view the volunteers as important human capital for community sustainability. However, while volunteers are important for rural festivals, festival organizers may not have limited knowledge and understanding of volunteers because they have limited financial resources and do not have sufficient organization structure and staff, and also limited market resources available. So therefore, this study wanted to identify the role and impact of rural festival volunteers on sustainable community development using community capital perspective. And this figure shows our proposal model. We have four specific hypotheses. First, volunteers' motivations will be related to psychological ownership of the festival. Second, volunteers' psychological ownership will influence their perceived importance of festival in rural community development. Third, perceived importance of rural festivals will influence volunteers' community leadership and involvement. Lastly, both community leadership and involvement will impact the development of a community support.
Hello, everyone. My name is MiRan Kim from Michigan State University. From this part, I will talk about some methodology ways. We used a quantitative approach by employing both on-site and online surveys with volunteers from 12 rural festivals in Iowa, Kansas, and Michigan states. The festivals were selected based on different characteristics of a theme, time, location, and size. Data were collected from spring last year, 2019, through fall last year. During that period, we collected 429 data, which include 98 from a paper survey and 331 from an online survey. As I mentioned earlier, the 12 festivals were selected from 3 different states. As you can see, for example, there were some tulip festivals from all 3 states, a film festival from Michigan, and an art festival from Iowa, etc. Out of the 429 data we collected, 263 data were from 7 festivals in Iowa State, 133 data from Michigan, and 33 data from Kansas State. Regarding the data analysis, 377 data were used for data analysis after we cleaned uncompleted data and some outliers. For the descriptive analysis, we used SPSS, and structural equations modeling was used to test the measurement model and the hypothesized relationships. Here is a summary of a volunteers' demographics. For example, first of all, the majority of the respondents, which is about 75% of the respondents, were female, and about 50% of the respondents were 60 years old or older. And most of the respondents, with about 80%, they had a college degree, including a bachelor degree or higher degree. Over 40% of the respondents were employed full-time, and followed by the retired with 36%. Regarding volunteers' profiles, about 50% of the respondents had an annual household income of $75,000 or higher. The majority of the respondents, which is 80%, resided in a current state, and most of them lived 9 years or longer. 57% of the respondents volunteered the festival between 1 and 4 hours, and the half of the respondents volunteered the festival between 1 and 5 years.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is Jichul Jang from Kansas State University. I think it is time to talk about our interesting finding. The table you see is about descriptive statistics, including mean and standard deviation of each variable. As you can see the table, we found similar motivation importance as has been found in other previous studies. As you can see, the value right here, value expressions was the most important motivation, followed by social, enhancement, and protective. It suggests that the main reason for volunteering at festival is that they seek to express pro-social and humanitarian value throughout the action, as well as to enhance bond with the family and friends who volunteer. As you can see at the bottom, the careers opportunity, I think, was the least important reasons for the volunteering. The mean score for the psychological ownership, load of the festival and the community was a 5.71 and 6.41, which are pretty high on 7-point scale. We're going to use the 1 strongly disagree, the 7 strongly agree. So while the mean score of the leadership development was 2.69, which is relatively low on 7-point scale. This is our conceptual models. Dr. Lee is already mentioned in the introduction. So this study tests the hypothesis based on the model we shown in the PPT. As you can see, our model consists of 2 parts. The first part about in the festival, the other part is the community. The first part of our model is about impact of the volunteer motivation, enhancing psychological ownership, which will influence the perceived importance of the festival in community development. The second part of our model, as you can see right here, is about the role of the festival in the community in developing community leadership as well as the environment, which will develop community support. I will talk about more the detail about our findings. As you can see, this is our first part of our model. Hypothesis 1 proposed that volunteers' motivation will be related to psychological ownership of the festival. The relationship between the 5 factors of the volunteer motivation and psychological ownership was supported, except for the 2 factors of the protective and the career of the volunteer motivation. The more specifically, the research findings indicate that the factor of the value, social, and enhancement of the volunteer motivation has significant effect on the volunteer's psychological ownership. In addition, that the hypothesis 2 suggests that volunteer psychological ownership will influence the perceived importance of the festival in community development. So as you can see, the strong relationship between psychological ownership and the role of the festival for community was found, suggesting that the festival volunteer with a strong psychological ownership are more likely to perceive the importance of the festival in community development. Our second part of our model shows us the relationship between the festival and the community. So all of our hypotheses were supported. So more specifically, the role of the festival in community was a statistically significant relationship with the leadership development as well as the community involvement. Furthermore, leadership development and community involvement were positively associated with the community support. What I'm trying to say is that if volunteers perceive the importance of the festival in community, they are more likely to participate in the community activity and show the leadership by taking the initiative to improve things in the community, which lead to support the community where they live. I think our conceptual model could help organizers and tourism bodies improve their understanding of the importance of the local festival and identify the better way of the expanding community support. I think next, Linda will talk about our nice summary about our.
Yes, good morning. This is Linda Niehm from Iowa State University. Just to conclude our findings, we found support for the relationship between rural community volunteer motivations and psychological ownership concerning the festival and its role in the community overall. As was just noted, psychological ownership was also found to be strongly and positively related to the role of festivals in rural communities. That really key importance of festivals to rural communities was also related to both community involvement and leadership development, ultimately leading to enhanced community support. So in sum, these findings really highlight that volunteerism in the rural community setting, festival setting, can aid in the development of important assets and stocks of community capitals. We framed our study by the community capitals perspective. So not just human capital, but a whole realm of capitals can be impacted by the festival and the volunteerism that takes place within it. So if a community can strategically position its volunteer assets, that may in turn lead to a more vibrant and sustainable community. And this study is one of the first to really recognize the importance of volunteers as human capital and highlight volunteers' potential influence on community sustainability through these community system interactions in that festival context. There are a few practical implications that I'd also like to share. So rural community festivals and volunteerism might really be a key force for helping these rural communities to navigate change. We know that there are many aspects of change going on in society in general right now, but also in rural communities have their own unique set of issues. Festivals bring the community members together in a unique way. They really get everybody out there. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach, and they're needed from the grassroots level through the execution of the event, and they provide opportunities for these individuals to develop leadership as well as showcase points of community pride. Our study suggests that festival volunteerism then can play an important role in garnering community support and sustainability. This is particularly important at a time when rural areas are looking at ways to attract and retain residents. They want to get as many people in the community as they can, so festivals certainly attract visitors. That creates, in turn, more economic activity at the local level, and also gives, as I've noted, an opportunity to grow local leadership. So our findings, we feel, will be useful to not only the festival organizers, but also economic and community developers, extension program specialists, people such as business consultants, or really anyone, organization that is providing support to rural towns and their residents. As far as our next steps, in terms of academic research, we'd like to look at examining a volunteer's profiles as well as the unique festival profile. Moderates the impact of volunteers on the rural community, and also further exploring some of the psychological variables that were not in our current model, like place attachment and involvement, and looking at their impact on rural community festivals and volunteerism. We also see that our findings will be really useful on an applied level as well, and we would like to develop some outreach tools, specifically using our findings to create an assessment tool and related programming materials that could be used for rural festival volunteer recruitment, training, as well as retention. And that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses are here. We would really like to acknowledge and thank NCRCRD for their funding and their great support of this research project. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Mark, and I'm sure that there may be some questions, and our group can
all right, thanks, Linda. I see that Bruce has a question here, which I think is a good one. I have a question about the demographics as well, but maybe we could start with a response to Bruce's question. And then for the other participants, if you have a comment or a question, please feel free to type it in. I see that Andy is typing now.
Okay. Actually, at this moment, we actually have not compared our respondents' demographics from the populations, but definitely this will be great to know and then see how much the demographics between our sample and population could be different or similar. So we need to look at this area more in detail. And SoJung, you have any additional comments as well here?
But their values and their like enhancement, of their life is an important reason that why people are doing volunteering. So it is important for us to understand why people are doing volunteers and try to meet their needs. That could be an important part that we can suggest based on our study.
So we have also a question from Andy, which maybe in part you've addressed. Do you have any additional comments for Andy about volunteer involvement in rural communities that are losing capacity? While we're waiting for a response, I'll just add in another question. You know, I was looking at the demographics, and it seemed that most volunteers were older and higher income. And you know, with all the different types of festivals that you've looked at, I wonder if there were some types of activities that might have more younger people who are volunteering versus older. And so type of festival influences the type of volunteers that are attracted to join in. While we're waiting for a response as well, we have a webinar summary evaluation, which we really appreciate your feedback on. And for the presenters, please feel free to respond to Andy or my question. You may have to unmute. SoJung, would you like to respond to these questions?
While we're collecting our data. And I found many young kids and like college students were there to help the festival. So maybe the characteristics of the festivals could be one important factor to attract more young generation to participate in the rural events. Measure the protective motivation. We had 3 questions. The first one was about volunteering at the festival is a good escape from my routine life. And also, volunteers at the festival helps me work through my own personal problems. And also, the volunteering at the festival makes me less feel lonely. So, volunteers give opportunity to be away from my personal problems or just give a kind of break from my routine life. That's what we measured. Hope that is a good answer to you.
And regarding the question by Barb, actually, in this
I want to respond by the Mark. I think Mark is a really good question. I think, I think it depends on the type of the festival because as you can see, we, contact a festival such as, Tulip Festival, Orange City Tulip Festival, Kansas, Tulip Festival in rural area. So maybe we can just collect data from the Nashville. There is a very country music, festival. This is pretty big. At that time, so many young generation is spend their time to volunteer for this music festival. In rural areas, so in terms of the population, I think it's usually older generations, baby boomer. They just stay there, so they want to just more, help their community. So this is why they just spend their time for the volunteering in the festival. I believe so. We are not statistically significant compared with our sample with community population, but I'm pretty sure that our sample population is represented the community where we collect it. So usually it's more younger, more older population spend their time for the volunteer at the local festival. You're welcome.
Great. Thanks. Maybe we have time for one more response to Jody's question about motivational factors in the survey related to recruitment.
So, Judy, I think your question is if our motivation factors in the survey was for related to recruitment or retention. We particularly just ask why they decide to volunteer at the festival by like 6 different factors. So I'm not really sure clearly sure about the retention factors of volunteers. I don't think we include that factors in our motivation factors because we include only 6 factors. This is our about values, protective, career, social, understanding, and enhancement.
Well, okay. I think maybe now is a good time to close off the webinar. thanks to all the presenters for sharing this useful work with us, and thanks to the participants for joining in. And I hope everybody is doing well and staying healthy.
Thank
So
you.
we will do this again next week.